James Robinson's hands were still shaking from the alternator grease when his phone rang. The job interview, the one that could save his daughter's life, started in 12 minutes. He was 3 miles away, in a snowstorm, with a stranger's broken-down BMW sitting in front of him like a test he hadn't studied for. He could leave. Nobody would blame a single dad for choosing his kid over a stranger. 47 other cars had already passed this woman without stopping. He'd counted them while his truck idled behind her headlights, cutting through the falling snow like accusations. But Sarah's voice echoed in his head, clear as the day she'd said it 3 years ago in that hospital bed that smelled like disinfectant and goodbye. "Don't let the world make you hard, baby. Promise me you'll stay kind, even when it costs you." James killed the engine and stepped out into the cold. The woman stood beside her car in heels that had no business on a snow-covered road, designer coat pulled tight against the wind. She turned when she heard his boots crunching through the slush, and her expression shifted from hope to wariness in the space of a heartbeat. James knew that look, had seen it his whole life. Black man approaching in the dark always meant recalculating risk in some people's minds. He kept his hands visible, voice gentle. "Ma'am, you okay, car trouble?" She exhaled, shoulders dropping half an inch. "Yes, it just died. AAA says 2 hours. James nodded toward her hood. "Mind if I take a look? I'm a mechanic. Might be able to help." The woman blinked like he'd spoken a language she was still learning to translate. Are you sure I don't want to impose?" "No imposition. Let me see what we're working with." She popped the hood and James leaned in with the little flashlight from his keychain, the one Emily had given him last Christmas with the dolphin charm dangling from the ring. The metal was cold enough to burn his fingers. Within 30 seconds, he'd found the problem: alternator shot, classic failure pattern, probably been making noise for weeks that this woman had ignored because people who drove cars like this usually paid someone else to listen. "Your alternator's gone," he said, straightening up. "But I can patch it enough to get you where you're going." "Where you headed?" "Evergreen Cafe on Maple Street." She checked her watch, and even in the dark James could see it was worth more than his monthly rent. 7:10 now. So much for making a good first impression. James felt something catch in his chest. He laughed before he could stop himself, the sound strange in the muffled quiet of the snowfall. "No kidding. That's where I'm going too. Small world." The woman's face did something complicated, surprise mixed with something softer that James couldn't quite name in the dim glow of his flashlight. "Really? What are the odds?" "In this weather? Pretty good, I'd say. Only cafe open on Christmas Eve." James pulled his tools from the truck bed, movements automatic from 20 years of fixing things that broke. "Give me 15 minutes. He worked while snow accumulated on his shoulders, turning his jacket from black to white in patches like camouflage that didn't quite work. The woman watched him, and they talked about nothing important, just easy conversation that felt weirdly natural for two complete strangers on the side of a dark road in the middle of a snowstorm. She mentioned running a company. He mentioned having a daughter who was smarter than him. Neither of them traded names because it didn't seem important in the moment, and James was too focused on making sure his hands didn't slip on the frozen metal while his phone buzzed in his pocket with what was probably the interviewer calling to ask where the hell he was. 15 minutes turned into 17, but the engine caught when she turned the key. James refused payment with a wave of his grease-stained hand and said, "Merry Christmas," like people actually did that anymore, like kindness was still currency that spent. She followed his taillights to the cafe, her BMW staying close enough that James could see her silhouette in his rearview mirror, and something about that felt significant in a way he couldn't articulate. They pulled into the parking lot right behind each other, and he held the door open for her because Sarah had raised him right, even if the world kept trying to teach him different. The cafe was warm and decorated for Christmas, with lights and garland and a tree in the corner that leaned slightly to the left. The owner, Harper, came over with menus and a smile that suggested she knew something they didn't. "James Robinson." James raised his hand like a kid in class who knew the answer but wasn't sure he wanted to give it. "That's me." Harper's smile widened. "Your date just arrived." She turned to the woman James had just spent 20 minutes helping. "Rebecca Morgan." The woman's eyes went wide, and James felt the floor tilt under his feet, like the earth had forgotten how to stay level. They both just stood there, frozen mid-step, staring at each other while understanding crashed over them in waves. "You're James." Rebecca's voice came out higher than normal, almost a question, even though it wasn't. "You're Rebecca." James sounded just as shocked, his brain still trying to catch up with what his eyes were telling him. The blind date. They said it at the exact same time and then both started laughing because this was absolutely insane. They'd just spent 20 minutes together on the side of the road, and neither of them had any clue they were about to meet each other anyway. The universe had a sense of humor after all. Harper was grinning like she'd planned the whole thing. "Well, looks like you two have already broken the ice. Your table's ready whenever you are." They sat down across from each other in a corner booth, and James tried not to think about how Sarah used to love this booth, how they'd sat here the night he proposed with a ring he'd saved 8 months to buy. The memory hit him sideways, sharp enough to make his chest tight, but then Rebecca shook her head and the present came rushing back. "So you didn't know it was me when you stopped?" James ran his hand through his hair, still damp from melted snow. "My sister didn't show me a picture. Just said her name's Rebecca, be nice, don't screw it up. Pretty much a direct order." Rebecca laughed, and it was genuine, the kind of sound that made her whole face change. "Amanda didn't show me anything either. Just said you were a good dad and I needed to give this a shot." The absurdity hit them both at once, how they'd been heading to the same place, how his help had literally saved their date from never happening, how the universe sometimes arranged things in ways that felt less like coincidence and more like choreography. James leaned back in the booth, feeling something in his shoulders unlock for the first time in hours. "So, should we start over then?" Rebecca's smile reached her eyes. This time the professional mask she'd been wearing since she walked in, cracking just enough to let something real show through. "Hi, I'm Rebecca. My car broke down on the way to a blind date I didn't want to go on." James's grin matched hers. "Hi, I'm Rebecca. I stopped to help a stranger so I'd be late to a blind date I also didn't want to go on." Harper appeared with the coffee pot, her timing either impeccable or suspicious. "Can I get you two started?" "Coffee," they said in unison, then looked at each other and started laughing again. Harper poured 2 cups and disappeared with a knowing look that suggested she'd be telling this story to every regular who walked through the door for the next month. 2 hours disappeared like they were nothing. James couldn't remember the last time he'd sat somewhere without checking his phone every 5 minutes, or thinking about the oil change he'd promised Gary by Tuesday, or whether Emily had finished her homework. But Rebecca had this way of making everything else fade into the background, like the world had decided to pause and let them have this. They talked about everything and nothing. She asked about the garage, and he told her about the time someone brought in a transmission held together with zip ties and actual chewing gum. "I'm sorry, chewing gum like the kind you chew." James nodded, completely serious. "Big red, cinnamon flavor. I could smell it from 10 feet away. Guy looked me dead in the eye and said his buddy told him it would work temporarily." Rebecca nearly spit out her coffee, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. "What did you tell him?" "Told him his buddy was an idiot and sold him a rebuilt transmission at cost because I felt bad for him." James shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, but Rebecca was looking at him in a way that made his skin warm. "You do that a lot, don't you? Help people even when it costs you." James shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the attention. "My dad always said you can either be rich or you can sleep at night. I'd rather sleep at night." Something in Rebecca's expression shifted, became softer and sadder at the same time. "I've spent the last 2 years surrounded by people who'd sell their grandmother for a good quarterly return, and here you are fixing transmissions at cost and stopping for strangers in snowstorms. What about you?" James flagged Harper down for more coffee, needing something to do with his hands. "What's it like running a fashion company?" Rebecca's smile faded just a little, like someone had turned down the brightness. "Honestly, right now it's like watching something you built with your bare hands slowly fall apart and not being able to stop it." James's expression shifted, the easy humor replaced by genuine concern. "That bad?" Rebecca found herself telling him everything, the investors breathing down her neck, the expansion deadline, the 200 people depending on her not to screw this up. The words poured out like she'd been holding them in so long they'd been looking for any crack to escape through. We need to expand by January 15th or they pull all funding, and the only location that works is this property on Market Street. But the timeline's so tight and I just keep thinking, what if I can't pull it off? What if I've built this entire thing just to watch it collapse because I couldn't move fast enough? James reached across the table and squeezed her hand, and the contact was so unexpected and warm that Rebecca's breath caught. "Hey, you're clearly brilliant and tough as hell. You'll figure it out." His confidence in her, this guy who'd known her for all of 3 hours, made her throat tight in a way she hadn't felt since her parents' funeral when she was 19, and suddenly alone in the world with nothing but their life insurance money and a business degree she hadn't finished yet. Harper brought the check, and James grabbed it before Rebecca could react. When she protested, he just smiled. "You can get the next one." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, something playful creeping back into her voice. "Pretty confident there's going to be a next one." James's smile got wider, more genuine than anything she'd seen from a man in years. "Well, yeah. I still owe you for the entertainment value of watching your face when you realized I was your date." They walked out into the parking lot where snow was coming down heavier now, covering everything in white, like the world was trying to start fresh. Rebecca's car looked like a frosted cake, the windshield already buried under 2 inches of powder. James looked at her car with a mechanic's critical eye, the way other people might study a patient's chart or a legal brief. "That alternator's not going to last the night. I can fix it properly tomorrow if you want. Shop's closed for Christmas, but I'll be there anyway doing paperwork." Rebecca hesitated because accepting felt like crossing some line from blind date into something more real, something that required acknowledging this connection humming between them like an electric current. "I don't want to ruin your Christmas." James laughed, the sound warm enough to cut through the cold. "Trust me, my Christmas is going to be an 8-year-old waking me up at 5 a.m. to open presents and then watching Elf for the millionth time. Fixing your car would actually be a nice break." "Can I meet her?" The words came out before Rebecca could stop them, and James's expression shifted to surprise. "Emily? You want to meet Emily?" Rebecca felt her face heat up despite the cold. "I mean, only if that's okay. You mentioned she likes fashion, and that's kind of my whole thing. But if it's too soon or weird, just forget I said anything." James was smiling at her in this soft way that made her stomach flip, like she'd just said something profound instead of awkward. "Tomorrow afternoon. Say around 2. Fair warning, though, she's going to lose her mind when she finds out who you are." The next afternoon, Rebecca stood outside a door above Robinson Auto Repair wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual designer armor, holding a bag of art supplies she'd grabbed from an overpriced craft store at 7 in the morning because apparently she'd lost her mind. She was more nervous than she'd been for any investor meeting in her life, her palms actually sweating despite the December cold. James opened the door, and his whole face lit up when he saw her like she was something he'd been hoping for but hadn't quite believed would show up. Then a tiny tornado in reindeer pajamas came flying past him, screaming at a pitch only dogs should be able to hear. "Daddy, there's a princess at the door!" Emily's eyes were huge, her missing front tooth making her look even more adorable, and Rebecca started laughing before she could help it. "Not a princess, sweetheart. I'm Rebecca." Emily's jaw literally dropped, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. "You're Rebecca Morgan, from the magazine. Daddy, she's famous." She grabbed Rebecca's hand and dragged her inside before anyone could say another word. The apartment was small but warm and decorated for Christmas, with obvious care, the kind of home that had love baked into every corner, that smelled like sugar cookies and pine sol, and something else Rebecca couldn't quite name, but recognized as the thing her own childhood home had lost when her parents died. Emily pulled out a shoebox overflowing with drawings, and Rebecca sat on the floor in her designer jeans that cost more than most people's weekly salary, and went through each one with genuine interest. This kid had talent, real talent. The kind of eye for proportion and flow that couldn't be taught, that some people spent years in design school trying to develop and never quite grasped. "These are incredible, Emily. Have you ever tried draping fabric?" Emily shook her head, confused, and Rebecca grinned. "Watch this." She grabbed a bedsheet and showed Emily how to drape it over a chair to create different silhouettes, and within minutes they were both on the floor giggling and creating makeshift fashion designs, while James watched from the kitchen doorway with hot chocolate mugs in his hands. His heart was doing things it hadn't done since Sarah died, things he'd thought were dead and buried with her. Because Rebecca was sitting on his floor in $100 jeans teaching his daughter about fashion design and looking more relaxed and happy than she'd looked in any of the put-together photos he'd Googled last night when he couldn't sleep. "You're good with her," he said, handing Rebecca a mug covered in whipped cream that was probably more cream than chocolate. Rebecca looked up at him and smiled, and James felt something in his chest crack open that he'd kept locked up tight for 3 years. "She makes it easy." They spent the afternoon like that, the three of them, and it felt weirdly natural, like they'd been doing this forever, like Sarah's absence had left a space that was exactly Rebecca-shaped, and James hated himself a little bit for thinking that because it felt like a betrayal, even though Sarah had made him promise to find this again. When Emily climbed into Rebecca's lap to show her a particularly complicated dress sketch, Rebecca felt something break loose in her chest that she'd kept walled off since the night her parents' car went off that bridge in the rain. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" Emily asked it with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, and Rebecca choked on her hot chocolate while James turned bright red. "Emily, we just met. You can't just ask people that." Emily looked between them with an 8-year-old's brutal honesty, the kind that cut straight through all the polite lies adults told themselves. "But you like her, I can tell. You smile different." James opened his mouth to deny it, but Rebecca was laughing and Emily kept going, oblivious to the emotional landmine she was about to step on. "And Daddy needs someone nice because he's been sad since Mommy died, but he pretends he's not." The room went quiet. James's expression shuddered like someone had pulled down steel blinds, and Rebecca realized they'd just crashed into territory way deeper than a second date usually went. This was the minefield, the place where the dead lived alongside the living and demanded to be acknowledged. "I'm going to go check your car." James's voice was tight, carefully controlled, and he disappeared downstairs to the garage before Rebecca could say anything. Emily looked worried, her bottom lip trembling. "Did I make Daddy sad?" Rebecca pulled her close, her own throat tight with emotions she didn't have names for. "No, baby, you didn't. Your Daddy just misses your Mommy a lot." Emily nodded like this made perfect sense, like she'd already worked through grief in ways Rebecca was still learning at 32. "Aunt Michelle says that's why he needs someone new to love, so he can be happy again." Rebecca's heart absolutely shattered because this little girl understood way too much about loss and loneliness and the specific kind of pain that came from watching someone you loved disappear into their own sadness. Emily played with Rebecca's bracelet, the silver one her mother had given her for her 16th birthday, then said casually, like she was commenting on the weather, "Daddy's worried about the garage." Rebecca's attention sharpened, a cold feeling sliding down her spine. "Why is that, sweetheart?" Emily shrugged with the unconcern of a child who didn't understand that some information could detonate like bombs. "Some fancy people want to buy our building. Daddy said we might have to move." "What building?" Rebecca's voice came out steady, even though her hands had started shaking. Emily pointed down toward the floor, toward the garage below their feet. "This one. Robinson Auto Repair. It's on Market Street. The little strip mall with the pizza shop and the dry cleaners." Rebecca's vision tunneled. The world contracted to a single point of horrible, perfect clarity. She knew that property, knew it intimately, had the acquisition papers sitting on her desk with the address circled in red marker. The building they wanted to demolish to put up her flagship store was the garage directly below her feet. The garage James owned, the business he'd built, the dream his dying wife had probably made him promise to keep alive. And she was the one about to destroy it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she already knew what it would say before she looked. Kenneth's name flashed on the screen with a preview of the text that confirmed every nightmare currently racing through her mind. "Board meeting moved to January 10th. Need final decision on Market Street property, ASAP. Investors getting antsy. Don't let this slip through our fingers. Rebecca stared at the message and felt sick. The universe had just handed her an impossible choice wrapped in Christmas lights and a little girl's drawing. Save her company and destroy the man she was falling for, or save James and watch everything she'd built for 10 years crumble into nothing. And there was no world where she got to have both. She made some excuse about a work emergency that sounded fake even to her own ears, and practically ran out of James's apartment like the building was on fire. Emily's confused little face asking, "But we were having so much fun," was going to haunt her nightmares for weeks, maybe years, maybe forever. Rebecca sat in her car with her hands shaking on the steering wheel, the heater blasting but doing nothing to warm the ice that had settled in her bones. She pulled out her phone and texted Kenneth 3 words that felt like signing a death warrant. "We can't buy it." He called immediately. She could hear the fury in the first syllable. "What do you mean we can't buy it? That property is our only option. The investors love the location. The timeline works. Rebecca, what the hell is going on?" She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. "The owner is someone I know. We can't do this to him." The silence on the other end was so heavy she could feel it crushing her chest, making it hard to breathe. "You're tanking our company for a guy you've known for 48 hours? He's a single father, Kenneth. That garage is his whole livelihood, his late wife's dream. I can't just bulldoze it." Kenneth's voice went cold in that way it did when he was about to say something she didn't want to hear, the tone he used in boardrooms when he was about to destroy someone's pitch. "And what about the 200 people who work for us? What about their livelihoods? You going to look them in the eye and tell them they're unemployed because you caught feelings for some mechanic?" Rebecca didn't have an answer for that because he was right, and she hated it. Hated him for being right, hated herself for putting them in this position, hated the universe for making her choose. She hung up the phone and drove home through snow that was coming down so hard she could barely see the road, her wipers working overtime and still not keeping up. The world was white and blurred, and she couldn't tell if it was the snow, or the tears, or both. 3 days went by, and James's texts kept coming, each one a knife twisting deeper. Day 1. "Hey, haven't heard from you. Everything okay?" Day 2. "Emily keeps asking when you're coming back. No pressure, just wanted you to know you're welcome here." Day 3, late at night when he probably couldn't sleep. "If I did something wrong, I'm sorry. Would really like to see you again." Each message felt like a physical wound. Rebecca wanted to answer so badly it physically hurt, made her chest tight, and her hands shake every time her phone lit up with his name. But what was she supposed to say? "Sorry I ghosted you. My company wants to destroy your business, and I'm choosing my career over you. Sorry. I let your daughter draw pictures of us as a family when I knew the whole time I was going to take everything from you." On day 4, Michelle showed up at Rebecca's office unannounced. The receptionist looked terrified, trying to stop her, but Michelle just walked right past like she owned the place. She had James's eyes, his jawline, that same quiet strength that seemed to run in their family like genetic code. "I'm James's sister, and we need to talk." Rebecca stood up from her desk, professional mask sliding into place like armor she'd learned to wear in boardrooms full of men who thought her age made her incompetent. "I'm really busy right now." Michelle put a folded piece of paper on the desk with the kind of careful precision that suggested she was fighting not to throw it. "Emily wanted me to give you this, then I'm leaving. But you should know that James hasn't smiled once since Christmas Day, and that little girl thinks she did something to scare you away." Rebecca unfolded the drawing with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. It showed 3 people holding hands under a Christmas tree labeled in crayon with wobbly letters that spelled out Daddy, me, and Rebecca. Underneath, in Emily's careful 8-year-old handwriting, "My Christmas wish, please don't leave us." Rebecca's vision blurred, and she had to sit down because her legs just gave out. The chair caught her, but barely, and Michelle's voice got softer, lost some of that protective sister edge. "I don't know what happened, but James hasn't been this happy in 4 years, not since Sarah died. And Emily thinks you hung the moon. She's been drawing wedding dresses all week. Just think about that." After Michelle left, Rebecca sat there staring at the drawing and the property acquisition papers side by side on her desk. Two futures, two promises, 200 people on one side, one man and his daughter on the other, and her in the middle trying to figure out which betrayal she could live with. Then something clicked in her brain like puzzle pieces finally fitting together, like the universe deciding to throw her a lifeline instead of just watching her drown. She grabbed her phone and called Kenneth, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "What if we don't demolish the garage?" Kenneth sounded like she'd suggested they start selling products on the moon. "What are you talking about? What if we build around it, mixed development? Keep Robinson Auto Repair on the ground floor, put our flagship store on the upper levels." Rebecca was already pulling up building plans on her computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard fast enough to make mistakes she had to backspace and fix. The silence on Kenneth's end was different this time, thoughtful instead of angry. She could practically hear the wheels turning in his head, running the numbers, seeing the angles. "That's actually kind of brilliant. Blue collar meets high fashion. It's unique. Investors might eat that up. And we partner with him. His garage services our customers. Everyone wins." Rebecca felt hope flicker in her chest for the first time in days, fragile as a candle flame in the wind. Kenneth was already typing. She could hear the keyboard clicking through the phone. "Let me run the numbers. If this works, Rebecca, I'm giving you a raise and also admitting you were right, which I hate doing." 2 days later, Rebecca walked into Evergreen Cafe and her heart nearly stopped. James was there with Emily having hot chocolate at the counter. The second Emily spotted her, the kid launched herself across the cafe, screaming Rebecca's name loud enough to make every head turn. Rebecca caught her and held on tight while Emily whispered against her neck like a prayer, "I knew you'd come back. I knew it." James stood up slowly, and Rebecca could see the walls he'd rebuilt in the past 6 days, the careful distance he'd put between himself and hope. She'd done that, put that guardedness back in his eyes. "Can we talk?" James nodded and told Emily to go sit with Harper for a minute. They slid into the same booth where they'd had their first date, the one that felt like a lifetime ago, even though it had only been a week. The leather was cracked in the same places, the table still had that ring from someone's coffee cup, but everything else had changed. Rebecca pulled out a folder with shaking hands. "I owe you an explanation and an apology." James's jaw was tight, his hands flat on the table like he was trying to keep them from doing something he'd regret. "Okay." Rebecca took a breath that didn't quite fill her lungs. "My company wanted to buy your property, the garage. We were going to demolish it for a flagship store. And I didn't know it was yours until Emily mentioned the address." She watched James's face go through about 17 emotions in 3 seconds. Shock, betrayal, understanding, resignation, anger, and something that looked like grief, all fighting for dominance. "So you just disappeared?" His voice was flat, carefully empty, and it hurt worse than if he'd yelled, worse than anything. "I was trying to figure out how to save my company without destroying yours." Rebecca slid the folder across the table, her hands leaving damp prints on the manila surface. "Partnership proposal. We build around your garage. Mixed development. You stay on the ground floor. We expand above. 50-50 partners on the whole property." James opened the folder like it might explode, like the papers inside might rearrange themselves into something terrible if he wasn't careful. He read through the proposal with his mechanic's hands that she'd watched fix her car, leaving smudges on the expensive paper. "You did this for me." Rebecca shook her head hard enough to make her vision blur. "I did this for us, all 3 of us. You keep the garage honor. Sarah's memory, I save my company. And Emily gets what she wished for." James looked up and his eyes were wet, shining in the cafe's warm light. "You're serious about this?" Rebecca reached across the table and took his hand, felt the calluses and the strength and the warmth. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." James stared at the partnership proposal until the words started to blur together, his brain still trying to catch up with what Rebecca was offering. 50-50, equal partners. Keep the garage, expand upward, save them both. It was elegant in its simplicity, impossible in its execution, and sitting right there in black and white like a dare from the universe. "I need time to think about this." His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by the past week of silence and wondering what he'd done wrong. Rebecca nodded like she'd expected that, like she understood that trust once broken didn't just snap back into place because you said the right words. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Kenneth's running the numbers now, but I won't move forward without your agreement. Not on this. Not after—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "Not after what I did." James folded the proposal back into its folder, his hands careful despite the tremor running through them. "Why didn't you tell me the second Emily mentioned the address?" "Because I panicked." Rebecca's honesty hit like a physical thing, blunt and unvarnished. "Because I'd just spent the most perfect afternoon I've had in years and then found out I was about to destroy it. Because I was a coward who ran instead of facing what I'd done." Emily appeared at James's elbow, tugging on his sleeve with the persistence of water wearing down stone. "Daddy, can Rebecca come to dinner? Mrs. Clark made her casserole, the good one with the cheese." James looked at Rebecca and saw his own uncertainty reflected back that fragile hope that felt too dangerous to hold on to. "You don't have to. I'd love to." Rebecca's answer came fast enough to cut him off, and Emily squealed loud enough to make the couple in the next booth wince. They walked back to the apartment in silence, Emily chattering between them about the snow and the lights, and how she'd asked Santa for new colored pencils and maybe a puppy, even though Daddy said apartments didn't allow dogs. James watched Rebecca navigate the icy sidewalk in boots that were better suited to boardrooms than winter streets, and something in his chest loosened when she didn't complain, didn't act like this was beneath her. Patricia Clark was waiting at their door with a casserole dish wrapped in tinfoil and a knowing smile that made James want to hide. She was 72 years old with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, Sarah's closest friend since before James had even met his wife, and the closest thing to a grandmother Emily had ever known. "So, this is the young woman who's had you checking your phone every 5 minutes like a teenager." James felt his face heat up. "Mrs. Clark." "Patricia, please." She thrust the casserole into James's hands and turned to Rebecca with an appraising look that would have made lesser people flinch. "You're even prettier than Emily's drawing suggested, though she did get your eyes wrong. They're more gray than blue." Rebecca laughed, surprised and genuine. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Clark." "Patricia. And I know who you are, dear. Looked you up after James mentioned your name 47 times in one conversation." She patted James's cheek with a weathered hand. "Sarah would have liked her, just so you know." She disappeared down the hallway before James could respond, leaving him standing there with a casserole and a heart that felt too big for his rib cage. Rebecca was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something soft and sad mixed together. Dinner was easier than it should have been. Emily dominated the conversation with tales of second-grade drama and her best friend Madison, who could burp the alphabet. And wasn't that the coolest thing ever? Rebecca listened, like it mattered, asked follow-up questions, didn't check her phone once, even though James knew for a fact she had a company falling apart. After Emily went to bed, they sat on the couch with coffee cups warming their hands and the kind of silence that felt comfortable instead of heavy. The Christmas tree lights blinked in colors that reflected off the windows, turning the night outside into a kaleidoscope. "She really does have your eyes, you know." Rebecca gestured to a photo on the mantel, Sarah holding newborn Emily in a hospital bed, exhausted and radiant at the same time. James felt the familiar ache settle in his chest, duller than it used to be, but still present. 3 years and it still hit him sometimes like a freight train. Sarah wanted kids so badly. "We tried for 5 years before Emily finally stuck. The doctors said it was a miracle." "What was she like?" The question should have hurt more than it did, but Rebecca asked it with such genuine curiosity that James found himself answering. "Stubborn, funny, had this way of seeing the best in everyone even when they didn't deserve it. She made me promise—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat like fishhooks. Rebecca waited, didn't push. Just sat there with her coffee and her patience until James could breathe around the grief enough to continue. 3 promises before she died. Take care of Emily. Don't let the world make me hard. And find love again." His laugh came out bitter, sharp-edged. That last one felt impossible for a long time. Rebecca's hand found his in the space between them, her fingers threading through his like they belonged there. And now I'm terrified. The honesty felt like jumping off a cliff. Because Emily drew that picture, and I can see it too, that future where you're part of this. And it scares the hell out of me, because what if I lose you the way I lost Sarah? What if I let myself fall and then— Rebecca squeezed his hand tight enough to ground him. "James, I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. But I can promise I'm here right now. And I want to be here tomorrow. That partnership proposal isn't just business. It's me trying to build something with you that doesn't end when the paperwork's signed." James pulled her closer and kissed her slow and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. She tasted like coffee and hope and the future he'd been too scared to imagine. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, their breathing synced up. "I'll sign it. The partnership." His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "But I need you to promise me something." "Anything. No more running, no more ghosting when things get hard. We talk, we fight if we have to, but we don't disappear on each other." Rebecca nodded against his skin. "I promise." The next morning, James woke up to his phone ringing at 6 a.m. Kenneth Sterling's name flashing on the screen with the kind of insistence that meant bad news. He extracted himself from the couch where he'd fallen asleep with Rebecca tucked against his shoulder, her hair tickling his chin, and answered before the noise could wake her. "James Robinson." "Speaking." Kenneth's voice was all business, clipped and efficient. "Kenneth Sterling, Rebecca's business partner. She probably mentioned me. Listen, I've run the numbers on the mixed-use development and they work. Better than work, actually. But I need to meet with you today, preferably before Rebecca gets to the office." Something in James's gut twisted. "Why before Rebecca?" "Because I want to make sure you understand what you're getting into. No offense, Mr. Robinson, but you're a mechanic. This is a multi-million-dollar real estate deal with complications you might not be equipped to handle. I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page." James's jaw tightened. He'd heard that tone before, that careful condescension that men in expensive suits used when they thought blue-collar meant stupid. "What time?" 8 a.m. Morgan Fashion headquarters. I'll have my assistant leave your name at the desk." The call disconnected before James could respond. He stood there in his living room in sweatpants and a t-shirt that had seen better days, looking at Rebecca still asleep on his couch, and wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. Morgan Fashion headquarters occupied 3 floors of a glass building downtown that probably cost more than James would make in 10 lifetimes. The lobby was all marble and chrome and people in suits that fit like second skins, everyone moving with purpose and expensive coffee cups. James walked in wearing his only sport coat and jeans he'd ironed for the first time in a year and felt every eye track him like a glitch in the system. Kenneth Sterling's office was on the top floor with windows that overlooked the whole city. The man himself was younger than James expected, maybe 40, with the kind of sharp features that suggested he smiled with his mouth, but never his eyes. He stood when James entered, offered a hand with a grip designed to intimidate. "Mr. Robinson, thanks for coming on short notice. You made it sound important." Kenneth gestured to a chair that was more art installation than furniture. "It is. Can I be frank with you? I'd prefer it. Rebecca is brilliant, but she's also sentimental, and sentiment makes for bad business decisions." Kenneth pulled out a different folder, thicker than the one Rebecca had shown James. "This is a competing offer for your property. Donald Harris, Harris Properties. He's willing to pay $2.3 million, cash, closing in 30 days. The number hit James like a physical blow. $2.3 million. That was Emily's college fund. Medical insurance that actually covered things. A real house with a yard. Security he'd never had in his entire life. "Why are you showing me this?" Kenneth leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd already won. "Because I want you to understand what you're walking away from if you sign Rebecca's partnership deal. Mixed development means shared profits, shared liability, Years of construction hassle. Harris's offer is clean, simple, life-changing money. You could buy another garage anywhere in the city. Robinson Auto Repair isn't just a garage. James kept his voice level even though his hands were shaking. It's my wife's legacy. It's my daughter's history. And $2.3 million is your daughter's future. Kenneth slid the folder across the desk. Harris wants an answer by tomorrow. I'm not saying take it. I'm just saying make sure you know what you're choosing. Rebecca's betting her company on this mixed-use plan, and if it fails, you both lose everything. At least Harris's offer is guaranteed. James picked up the folder, felt the weight of it. Does Rebecca know about this meeting? No. And I'd appreciate if we kept it between us. I'm protecting my partner, Mr. Robinson, even if she's too blinded by... Kenneth stopped himself, but the implication hung there like smoke. James stood the folder still in his hands. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Walking out of that building, James felt the folder burning a hole in his jacket pocket like evidence of a crime he hadn't committed yet. $2.3 million. The number echoed with every step, tempting and terrible. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Morning. Woke up alone on your couch. Where'd you go? James stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. The smart thing would be to tell her about the meeting, about Harris's offer, about Kenneth's warnings. But something stopped him. The memory of her panic when Emily mentioned the property the way she'd run, instead of fighting the fragility of trust they'd just started rebuilding. Had to open the shop early. Customer emergency. See you later. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Dinner tonight, my place. I'll cook. You cook. I can order takeout like a professional. 6 p.m. It's a date. James pocketed his phone and drove to the garage through morning traffic, the folder on his passenger seat like a bomb waiting to detonate. He had 24 hours to make a decision that would change everything, and no idea which choice would destroy him faster. The garage was quiet at 7 a.m., just the hum of the space heater and the smell of old oil and metal. James made coffee in the ancient pot that Sarah had bought their first year in business back when they were young and stupid and thought love could fix anything. He spread Harris's offer on the workbench next to Rebecca's partnership proposal and tried to make the numbers make sense. Partnership. Potentially more money long-term, but years of construction, shared risk, no guarantees. Keep the garage honor. Sarah's memory builds something with Rebecca and Emily. Complicated, messy, real. Harris's offer. Clean, immediate, more money than James had ever imagined having. Walk away, start fresh, somewhere else. Safe, simple, alone. The door chimed, and Mrs. Clark walked in with a thermos and a look that suggested she already knew why he was here instead of at home. Michelle called me. Said you looked like you'd seen a ghost when you left this morning. James hadn't even realized his sister had been watching. Kenneth Sterling made me an offer I can't ignore. The Morgan woman's partner. Mrs. Clark poured coffee from her thermos into 2 cups, stronger and better than anything from James's pot. And what did this offer entail? James showed her the folder, watched her eyebrows climb. Lord have mercy, that's life-changing money, James. I know. Sarah would want you to take it. James's head snapped up. What? Mrs. Clark settled onto the stool by the workbench with the ease of someone who'd sat there 1,000 times before. Sarah loved this garage, but she loved you and Emily more. If taking this money means security for your baby girl, means you don't have to choose between fixing cars and paying for asthma medication, she'd tell you to take it in a heartbeat. But the legacy. The legacy is Emily, not this building. Mrs. Clark's voice was firm, the kind of certainty that came from 72 years of living and watching people make the same mistakes over and over. Buildings can be rebuilt. Memories travel with you. Your daughter needs stability more than she needs nostalgia. James felt something crack in his chest, the weight of the decision suddenly too heavy to carry alone. What if I'm making a mistake either way? Then you make it and you live with it. That's what being a grown-up means, baby. Mrs. Clark squeezed his shoulder. But I'll tell you this, that Rebecca girl looks at you the way Sarah used to. Like you're the answer to a question she didn't know she was asking. And Emily's already drawing wedding dresses. Might be worth considering what you'd be building with that partnership that you can't build alone." The door chimed again, and Gary Young walked in stamping snow off his boots. He'd been bringing his truck to Robinson Auto for 15 years, trusted James with everything from oil changes to full engine rebuilds, and had the kind of loyalty that came from consistent good work and fair prices. "Boss, I heard something at the diner this morning. Donald Harris is telling everyone you're selling to him. That true?" James felt ice slide down his spine. "What exactly did he say?" "That he's buying the whole Market Street strip by end of month. Luxury condos going up by spring. Said Robinson Auto would be the first to go." Gary's expression was troubled, worried in a way that made the lines around his eyes deeper. "He was laughing about it, James, like it was already done." The folder on the workbench suddenly felt radioactive. "I haven't agreed to anything." "But he made an offer." James nodded slowly, watching Gary's face fall. $2.3 million. Gary whistled low. "Jesus, that's serious money. Can't blame you if you take it. But this garage is the only place left on Market Street that regular folks can afford. Harris tears it down, puts up his luxury shit. None of us can afford to live here anymore. My daughter's in school 3 blocks from here. I work 2 miles away. Where am I supposed to take my truck when the nearest honest mechanic is 40 minutes across town?" The weight of it hit James like a wave. It wasn't just about him and Emily and Sarah's memory. It was about Gary and his daughter, about Mrs. Chen, who ran the dry cleaners 2 doors down, about Mike's Pizza that had been there since the 70s, about the community that had grown up around these businesses like a garden no one had planned but everyone tended. "I'm not making any decisions yet," James heard himself say, even though the clock was ticking down to Harris's deadline. "Give me time." Gary nodded, but his eyes held doubt. "Just think about all of us when you decide, yeah, not just the money." After Gary left, James sat alone in the garage with 2 offers and a choice that felt impossible. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Can't stop thinking about last night, about you, about us." Another text seconds later. "Kenneth just told me the board wants to meet about Market Street tomorrow. Are you okay with that? Want me to stall?" James stared at his phone at the evidence that Rebecca had no idea her business partner was actively sabotaging their partnership, and felt the web of secrets tighten around him like a noose. He should tell her about the meeting with Kenneth, about Harris's offer, about the deadline ticking down. Instead, he texted back, "I'm okay with the meeting. See you at 6. 3 dots appeared. A heart emoji. "Can't wait." James put his phone down and buried his face in his hands, Sarah's voice echoing in his head. "Don't let the world make you hard, baby. Promise me." But the world wasn't making him hard. It was making him choose, and every option felt like a betrayal of someone he loved. The day crawled by in a blur of oil changes and brake jobs and customers who didn't know that James was barely holding himself together. At 5:30 he closed up, drove home to shower and change, and picked up flowers from the corner store because showing up empty-handed felt wrong, even though his whole life was imploding. Rebecca's penthouse was exactly what James expected, and nothing like it at the same time. Yes, there was the expensive furniture, and the art that probably cost more than his truck, and the view that made the whole city look like a toy model. But there were also books stacked haphazardly on every surface, a collection of coffee mugs in the sink that suggested she forgot to run the dishwasher, and photos taped to the refrigerator of people who were clearly family, even though Rebecca had said her parents were dead. "That's my mom and dad." Rebecca caught him looking, her voice soft with old grief. "Car accident when I was 19. They were coming to pick me up from college for Thanksgiving break. Black ice on the highway." James pulled her close without thinking, his arms around her, like he could somehow shield her from pain that had already happened. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." Rebecca's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "But sometimes it feels like yesterday. I built the company partly as a tribute to them. My dad was in fashion. My mom was his business manager. They always said I had their combined talents. They'd be proud of you. Rebecca pulled back, her eyes wet, but not quite crying. Would they? I'm not sure. The Martinez bakery thing, my dad would have been ashamed. He always said business should build up, not tear down. James felt the guilt twist in his stomach like a knife. He should tell her. About Harris. About Kenneth. About the choice he was facing. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped behind his teeth. They ate Thai food straight from the containers because Rebecca admitted she'd lied about cooking and ordered delivery instead, and James found himself laughing for the first time all day. They talked about everything except the partnership, except the property, except the deadline that was rushing toward them like a train with no brakes. After dinner, Rebecca pulled out a bottle of wine that probably cost more than James's monthly grocery budget and poured 2 glasses. I want to show you something. She led him to a room that had been converted into an office, walls covered in design sketches and fabric swatches and photos of models wearing clothes that looked like art. In the center was a massive drafting table with plans spread across it. This is the mixed-use building, what it could look like. Rebecca's finger traced the blueprint. Ground floor stays Robinson Auto, but we expand it. Give you twice the space, modern equipment waiting area for customers. Second and third floors are the flagship store. Fourth floor is offices. Fifth is a community space, free meeting rooms for local organizations, small business support center. James stared at the plans, seeing his garage transformed into something bigger while still being fundamentally itself. You designed this with an architect, but yes, I've been working on it every night since I ran out of your apartment. Rebecca's voice was quiet, vulnerable. I couldn't just take your garage, James. I had to build something that honored what you and Sarah created. The guilt hit James like a physical blow. Here was Rebecca pouring her heart into a solution that saved them both, and he was sitting on a competing offer from Harris that would blow the whole thing to pieces. The secret felt like it was choking him, cutting off his air. Rebecca, I need to tell you something. She turned to him, her expression open and trusting, and James's courage failed him completely, because telling her meant admitting he'd kept it secret, meant revealing that Kenneth had gone behind her back, meant potentially destroying the fragile trust they'd rebuilt. What is it? I love you. The words came out before James could stop them, bypassing his brain entirely and going straight from his terrified heart to his mouth. Rebecca's eyes went wide, her breath catching. You what? I love you. James said it again, committing to the freefall. I know it's fast and probably stupid, and we've only known each other a week, but Emily was right. I smile different now. And I haven't felt this way since Sarah died, and it scares the hell out of me, but I love you. Rebecca kissed him hard enough to make him forget his own name, her hands in his hair, his arms around her waist, the blueprints crinkling under their weight as they pressed against the drafting table. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, her forehead rested against his. I love you too. I didn't know I could feel this way about someone. Didn't think I deserved it after what I almost did to you. They stood there in her office, surrounded by plans for a future that might never happen, and James felt the weight of his secrets pressing down like gravity. His phone buzzed in his pocket, insistent and terrible. He pulled it out to find a text from an unknown number. Just a photo. Grainy, like it had been taken from a distance. James and Kenneth in the Morgan Fashion lobby that morning, the Harris Properties folder visible in James's hand. Below the photo, a message. 24 hours, Mr. Robinson. Don't make me wait. D.H. James's blood went cold. Donald Harris had been watching, had evidence of the meeting, could use it to destroy Rebecca's trust in him completely. Who is it? Rebecca was watching him with concern, her hand on his arm. Nothing, just a customer. The lie tasted like ash. I should go, early morning tomorrow. Rebecca's expression felt disappointment flickering across her face. Oh, okay. I thought maybe you'd stay. I can't, Emily. School night. The excuses piled up, each one feeling thinner than the last. Rain check. Of course. James kissed her goodbye and fled before she could see the panic in his eyes, before the secrets could spill out and destroy everything. He drove home with the radio off and the heater blasting, his phone burning a hole in his pocket with Harris's message and the ticking clock. At home, Emily was already asleep, and Mrs. Clark was on the couch with her knitting and a knowing look. Bad night. The worst. Want to talk about it? James slumped into the chair across from her, every muscle in his body tight with stress. I'm drowning in choices and all of them feel wrong. Mrs. Clark set down her knitting and fixed him with a look that had probably made generations of kids confess to crimes they didn't commit. James Morrison Robinson, you listen to me. Sarah made you promise 3 things. You're doing fine on the first one, Emily's happy and healthy and loved, but you're failing on the second. I'm not hard. You're lying to that girl because you're scared. That's not staying soft, baby. That's building walls. Mrs. Clark's voice was gentle but firm. Tell Rebecca about the Harris offer. Tell her about Kenneth's meeting. Give her the choice to fight for you or walk away, but don't make it for her by keeping secrets. James knew she was right. Had known it all day. But knowing and doing were separated by a canyon of fear. What if I tell her and she runs again? Then she wasn't the one Sarah meant when she made you promise to find love again. Mrs. Clark picked up her knitting. But you won't know unless you're honest. And tomorrow that Harris man is going to make that choice for you anyway. Better it comes from you first. James sat there in his living room while Mrs. Clark's needles clicked and Emily breathed softly in the next room, and made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff with no idea if there was water below. He pulled out his phone and texted Rebecca. Can we meet for breakfast tomorrow before the board meeting? I need to tell you something important. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. You're scaring me. Is everything okay? No, but it will be, one way or another. Okay. Evergreen Cafe, 7 a.m. See you there. James lay awake until 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and rehearsing conversations that all ended badly. When sleep finally came, it was full of dreams where he lost everything. The garage, Emily. Rebecca, all of it slipping through his fingers like water, while Donald Harris laughed in the background. James arrived at Evergreen Cafe at 6:45, too nervous to wait at home any longer. The same booth, the same cracked leather, the same coffee stains that had witnessed their first meeting. He ordered black coffee and watched the door like a man waiting for a verdict. Rebecca walked in at exactly 7, her face tight with worry that softened into relief when she saw him. She slid into the booth across from him and reached for his hands without hesitation. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't. James took a breath that didn't fill his lungs properly. Kenneth Sterling called me yesterday morning, asked me to come to his office. Rebecca's expression shifted, confusion flickering across her features. Kenneth called you. Why didn't he? She stopped, realization dawning like a slow horror. What did he want? To show me a competing offer for the property. Donald Harris, Harris Properties. $2.3 million cash, closing in 30 days. James pulled the folder from his jacket and set it between them like evidence in a trial. He told me I should understand what I'm walking away from if I sign your partnership deal. Rebecca's face went pale, then red fury and betrayal fighting for dominance. He did what? He said he was protecting you. That sentiment makes for bad business decisions. James watched her hands shake as she opened the folder, scanning the numbers that had kept him awake all night. I'm telling you because Mrs. Clark said lying to you makes me hard, and I promised Sarah I wouldn't let the world do that to me. Rebecca's laugh came out broken, sharp-edged. Kenneth went behind my back to sabotage our partnership, my own business partner. She looked up at James with eyes that were wet but furious. What did you tell him? That I'd think about it, and I have been all night. Because $2.3 million is Emily's college fund and her medical bills and security I've never had. It's tempting as hell, Rebecca. But Emily's already drawing wedding dresses, and Mrs. Clark says buildings can be rebuilt while memories travel with you, and you designed a mixed-use development that honors what Sarah and I built instead of just erasing it. James squeezed her hands hard enough to ground them both. I want the partnership. I want to build something with you that isn't just business. But I needed you to know about Harris's offer. Needed to be honest, even if it costs me everything. Rebecca stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loud against the floor. We need to go to the office, right now. The board meeting isn't until 9. I don't care about the board meeting. I care about Kenneth thinking he can manipulate you behind my back." Rebecca pulled out her phone and fired off a text with fingers that trembled with rage. He's about to learn exactly how bad a business decision he just made. They drove separately to Morgan Fashion headquarters, James following Rebecca's BMW through morning traffic that felt too slow for the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The lobby was already filling with employees in expensive suits, their conversations dying when James walked in beside Rebecca like he belonged there. Kenneth's assistant tried to stop them at the door to his office, but Rebecca walked right past with the kind of authority that came from having her name on the building. Kenneth looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face before it smoothed into professional neutrality. "Rebecca, James, I wasn't expecting—" "You went behind my back." Rebecca's voice was cold enough to frost the windows. "Called my partner Kenneth, and tried to convince him to take a competing offer without telling me." Kenneth stood slowly, hands raised in a gesture that was probably meant to be placating. "I was protecting the company. Harris's offer is solid, guaranteed money. Your partnership plan is high risk. My partnership plan is innovative and creates community value and actually honors what James has built instead of bulldozing it for luxury condos." Rebecca slammed the Harris folder on Kenneth's desk. "And you don't get to make decisions about my company without consulting me." "It's our company, Rebecca. I own 40%, which means I own 60%, and I make the final calls." Rebecca's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady, pure steel wrapped in silk. "James is signing the partnership agreement. We're moving forward with the mixed-use development. And you're going to support it, or you're going to find another company to work for." Kenneth's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. Mixing business with personal feelings always ends badly." "Then I'll make that mistake and live with it." Rebecca turned to James. "Do you have a lawyer?" "I what?" "You need representation. Someone who can review the partnership agreement, protect your interests. I'll recommend someone if you want, but it should be your choice." James felt something in his chest expand, warmth spreading through the cold fear that had been living there since yesterday. She was protecting him, making sure he had equal footing even though it cost her time and control. "I trust you." The words came out simpler than James intended, but they landed with the weight of truth. "If you say the agreement's fair, I'll sign it." Kenneth made a disgusted noise. "This is exactly what I was talking about. Sentiment over sense." "No." James turned to face Kenneth fully, his voice quiet but firm. "This is building something that lasts over taking what I can get. My dad always said you can either be rich or you can sleep at night. I'd rather sleep at night knowing I didn't let someone like Donald Harris destroy the community my wife loved." Rebecca's hand found his, their fingers threading together in front of Kenneth like a declaration. "The board meeting is in an hour. I'm presenting the partnership plan. Are you with me or against me, Kenneth?" Kenneth stared at them both for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't quite spit out. Finally he sat back down, his shoulders dropping in what might have been defeat or resignation. "I'm with you, but when this goes sideways, don't say I didn't warn you." "Noted." Rebecca pulled James toward the door. "Come on, we have a presentation to finalize." They spent the next hour in Rebecca's office going over numbers and projections and architectural renderings that made James's head spin. The board members started arriving at 8:45, filing into the conference room in expensive suits and expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical. Margaret Wilson, the lead investor, was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at James in his sport coat and jeans and raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Morgan, I wasn't aware we'd have guests at this meeting. Board, this is James Robinson, owner of Robinson Auto Repair on Market Street. He's my partner in the mixed-use development proposal." Rebecca's voice was steady, professional, but James could feel the tension radiating off her in waves. "James, this is the board of investors who will be deciding whether to fund our expansion." James nodded, acutely aware that he was the only person in the room whose clothes came from a department store instead of being custom-made. Margaret gestured to a chair. "Please sit." We're very interested to hear about this partnership." Rebecca pulled up the architectural renderings on the screen at the front of the room, and James watched her transform into the CEO he'd only glimpsed before. She was brilliant, laying out the business case with precision and passion, how the mixed-use development would create a unique brand identity, how partnering with Robinson Auto would give them access to the working-class demographic that luxury brands usually missed, how the community support would translate to customer loyalty worth more than any marketing campaign. The numbers project a return on investment within 5 years. Rebecca continued clicking through spreadsheets that made James's eyes cross. But more importantly, this development positions Morgan Fashion as a company that builds up rather than tears down. In a market saturated with luxury brands competing for the same wealthy customers, we differentiate by being the brand that serves everyone. Margaret leaned forward, her fingers steepled under her chin. "It's an interesting pitch, Ms. Morgan, but I'm concerned about the risk profile. Mr. Robinson's garage, no offense, operates on a very different scale than a multi-million-dollar fashion company. How do we ensure this partnership doesn't drag down your brand value?" Before Rebecca could answer, James found himself speaking. "With respect, ma'am, Robinson Auto has operated on Market Street for 20 years with a perfect safety record and a customer retention rate over 90%. My customers trust me because I've earned it one honest repair at a time. That's the kind of brand value money can't buy." The room went quiet. Margaret's eyebrow climbed higher. "You make a compelling point, Mr. Robinson. And frankly," James continued, his heart pounding but his voice steady, "luxury brands fail all the time because they forget that rich people started somewhere. They had parents or grandparents who worked with their hands, who understood the value of honest work. Morgan Fashion, partnering with a working-class garage doesn't lower your brand. It elevates mine, while reminding your customers where real value comes from." Kenneth was staring at him like James had grown a second head. Rebecca's expression was somewhere between proud and shocked. Margaret smiled for the first time since the meeting started. "I like him," she declared to the room. "Ms. Morgan, you've made your case well. But I have one concern that needs addressing before we vote." She pulled out a folder that made James's stomach drop. "Donald Harris contacted me yesterday. He's offering to buy the entire Market Street property himself, develop luxury condos, and give us prime ground floor retail space at below market rates. His timeline is faster, and his numbers are cleaner. Why should we choose your complicated partnership over his straightforward offer?" Rebecca's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "Because Harris's development would price out the existing community and create resentment that would hurt our brand long term. Our partnership preserves the neighborhood character plus Harris is corrupt." James heard the words come out of his mouth before his brain had fully approved them. Every head in the room swiveled toward him. Margaret's expression sharpened. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Robinson." James pulled out his phone, hands shaking slightly as he navigated to the folder he'd spent all night compiling. "For the past 2 weeks, I've been documenting Harris's pattern of property acquisition on Market Street. 15 businesses in the past year, all of them forced out after sudden violations from building inspectors who happen to golf with Harris every Thursday. Permits that should take months getting approved in days. City council members voting in his favor right after receiving campaign contributions from shell companies that trace back to Harris properties." He connected his phone to the conference room screen, pulling up bank records, inspection reports, witness testimonies from business owners who'd been pushed out. "I didn't sleep last night. Spent the time talking to every person Harris has destroyed following the paper trail. He's been bribing inspectors, manipulating permits, using city connections to force sales. And if Rebecca had taken his offer for my property, she would have been complicit in the same pattern." The room was dead silent. Margaret's expression had gone from skeptical to intensely focused. "How did you obtain these records?" "Public information mostly. Bank records from the county clerk. Inspection reports filed with the city. Testimony from people willing to go on record because they're tired of being pushed around." James met her gaze directly. "I'm not a lawyer or an investigator. I'm just a mechanic who knows how to follow a pattern when I see one. And Harris's pattern is corruption all the way down. Kenneth looked like he'd been punched. "You compiled this overnight." Mrs. Clark helped. Turns out retired librarians are very good at research. James managed a weak smile. "And Gary Young's daughter works at the county clerk's office. She pulled the permit records for me." Margaret was already on her phone. "I need legal to review this immediately. If what Mr. Robinson is saying is accurate, we cannot afford to be associated with Harris in any capacity." She looked at Rebecca with newfound respect. "Ms. Morgan, I'm inclined to approve your partnership proposal pending legal's review of these documents. All in favor?" 5 hands went up around the table. Kenneth's came up last, reluctant but present. "Motion passes. Legal will conduct due diligence on the Harris matter and report back within 48 hours. In the meantime, proceed with the Robinson partnership." Margaret stood, extending her hand to James. "Mr. Robinson, I suggest you take those documents to the FBI. If Harris is bribing officials, that's a federal matter." James shook her hand, feeling like he'd just run a marathon. "Yes, ma'am." The board filed out, leaving James and Rebecca alone in the conference room with Kenneth hovering by the door. Rebecca turned to James with an expression he couldn't quite read, pride and shock and something deeper. "You investigated Donald Harris all night instead of sleeping. I needed to know what I was choosing, and once I started digging, I couldn't stop." James rubbed his face, exhaustion hitting him like a wave. "He's been destroying people, Rebecca. People like the Martinezes. I couldn't let him do it to anyone else." Kenneth cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology, both of you. I thought you were making a sentimental mistake. Turns out you were making the only ethical choice." He looked genuinely uncomfortable, like admitting fault was physically painful. "I'll support the partnership fully going forward." "Thank you." Rebecca managed, still looking stunned. Kenneth left, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Rebecca turned to James and kissed him hard enough to make him forget his own name. When they broke apart, she was crying. "You could have taken Harris's money, could have walked away clean. Instead, you spent all night saving me from making a mistake I didn't even know I was about to make." "I wasn't saving you. I was choosing us." James wiped her tears with his thumbs, his hands cupping her face. "You redesigned your flagship store to make room for my garage. I can't let someone like Harris win when you're fighting that hard for something good." They stood there in the conference room, surrounded by architectural plans and financial projections, and James felt the weight of his decision settle into certainty. This was right. Messy and complicated and terrifying, but right. His phone rang. Unknown number. James answered to find a voice he didn't recognize, professional and clipped. "Mr. Robinson, this is Special Agent Michael Torres with the FBI. Margaret Wilson forwarded your documents regarding Donald Harris. We'd like you to come in for a statement this afternoon." 3 hours later, James sat in a gray room at the FBI field office going through his evidence with Agent Torres and a woman who introduced herself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Lisa Chen. They listened with the kind of focused attention that made James feel like every word mattered, taking notes and asking follow-up questions that suggested they'd been building a case against Harris for months. "Mr. Robinson, these documents corroborate several leads we've been pursuing. With your permission, we'd like to use them as evidence in a federal corruption investigation." Agent Torres slid a form across the table. "This is a witness cooperation agreement. You'd be under our protection, and we'd need you to testify if it goes to trial." James thought about Emily, about the target that might paint on their backs. "Is this dangerous?" "Harris has no history of violence, but we'll take precautions. The more important question is whether you're willing to see this through." Agent Torres's expression was serious, sympathetic. "A lot of people get scared when it becomes real. If you're not ready, we understand." James thought about Gary and his daughter, about Mrs. Chen at the dry cleaners, about the Martinez family who'd lost everything. "I'm ready. Someone needs to stand up to him." He signed the cooperation agreement with a hand that only shook slightly. By the time he left the FBI office, it was nearly 6 p.m., and his phone was full of missed calls from Rebecca, Michelle, and Mrs. Clark. He called Rebecca first. "Where are you? I've been worried sick." "FBI office. I just signed a witness cooperation agreement for the Harris case." James walked to his truck through a parking lot that felt too exposed, too vulnerable. They're building a federal corruption case. It's real, Rebecca. Her breath caught. Are you safe? Do you need protection? Torres said they'd take precautions. I'm heading home now. James started the engine, the familiar rumble grounding him. Can you come over later? I need to see you. Already on my way. James drove home through evening traffic, his rearview mirror suddenly full of potential threats. Every car could be Harris's people. Every stranger on the sidewalk could be watching. By the time he pulled into the garage, his shoulders were tight with tension that had nothing to do with the physical kind. Emily was upstairs with Mrs. Clark working on homework at the kitchen table. She looked up when James walked in and immediately knew something was wrong. Daddy, you're doing the jaw thing again. James touched his face, feeling the tension he hadn't realized he was holding. Just tired, Pumpkin. Long day. Mrs. Clark's knowing look said she didn't believe him for a second, but she kept her mouth shut until Emily went to her room. What happened? I testified against Donald Harris. Federal corruption case. FBI has me in witness protection protocols. James slumped into a chair, every muscle in his body aching. What am I doing, Mrs. Clark? I should be focused on keeping Emily safe, not picking fights with millionaires. You're doing what Sarah asked, staying soft in a hard world, fighting for what's right even when it costs you. Mrs. Clark squeezed his shoulder. That little girl in there is learning from everything you do. You want to teach her to look the other way when powerful people do wrong, or you want to show her how to stand up. The doorbell rang before James could answer. Rebecca stood on his doorstep with takeout bags and an expression that suggested she'd moved mountains to get there as fast as possible. Mrs. Clark took one look at them both and grabbed her coat. I'll be next door if you need me. Emily can stay the night at my place if things run late. After she left, Rebecca set the food on the counter and pulled James into a hug that lasted long enough for his heartbeat to slow down. Tell me everything. He did. The FBI interview, the cooperation agreement, the understanding that he'd just made himself a target. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her arms around him, like she could somehow shield him from the consequences of his own choices. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. Most people would have taken the money and run. You stayed and fought. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. James pulled back to look at her. What if Harris comes after Emily? What if I put her in danger for the sake of my pride? It's not pride, it's principle. And we'll protect her. Both of us. Rebecca's voice was fierce, certain. I have resources, security, lawyers, whatever you need. The offer should have felt like charity, like the kind of help James had spent his life refusing. But it didn't. It felt like partnership, like building something together that neither of them could build alone. Emily appeared in the doorway in pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Rebecca, are you staying for dinner? If that's okay with you and your dad. Emily's face lit up. Can we have a sleepover? Like a family? James and Rebecca looked at each other, the word hanging between them like a promise. Family. Fast and terrifying and somehow exactly right. Yeah, Pumpkin. Like a family. They ate Chinese food on the couch while Emily chattered about school and her best friend Madison, who could burp the alphabet, and how she'd drawn another dress design that Rebecca absolutely had to see. The normalcy of it felt surreal after the day James had survived, but also grounding. This was what he was fighting for. This ordinary magic of dinner and laughter, and a kid who felt safe enough to be silly. After Emily went to bed, Rebecca pulled out her laptop and showed James preliminary construction timelines for the mixed-use development. 6 months of planning, 18 months of building, 2 years until they could open for business. It felt impossibly long and terrifyingly immediate at the same time. What if the FBI case drags on? What if Harris tries to stop us? James stared at the timeline like it was a map to a destination he couldn't quite believe in. Then we fight, together. Rebecca closed the laptop and took his hands. James, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this partnership because it's good business, though it is. I'm doing it because I can't imagine building a future that doesn't include you and Emily. This isn't just about the garage or the flagship store. It's about creating something that lasts, something we can both be proud of. James kissed her slowly, tasting hope and fear and the future they were building one terrifying decision at a time. I love you, even when you're crazy enough to bet your company on a mechanic with more heart than sense. Especially then. Rebecca smiled against his lips. Your heart is what makes this work. Kenneth was wrong. Sentiment isn't bad business. Sentiment is what makes business worth doing. They fell asleep on the couch, tangled together, Rebecca's head on James's chest and his arm around her shoulders. In the morning, James woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Emily standing next to the couch with a drawing. I finished it. The wedding dress for Rebecca. James looked at the sketch, surprisingly sophisticated for an 8-year-old, with flowing lines and delicate details that suggested Emily had inherited more than just Sarah's artistic talent. She'd inherited her eye for beauty, her understanding that love could be rendered in fabric and thread. Rebecca stirred against his shoulder, blinking awake. Is that for me? Emily nodded shyly. For when you and Daddy get married, because you will write. You love each other, and you're building a building together, and you make Daddy smile again. James felt his throat tighten. Emily, it's complicated. No, it's not. Emily's voice had that absolute certainty that only children possess, the kind of clear-eyed truth that adults spent decades trying to unlearn. Mommy told me before she died that when Daddy found someone who made him happy again, I should help him not be scared. So I'm helping, by drawing the dress. Rebecca was crying silently, tears running down her face as she took the drawing with trembling hands. It's beautiful, Emily. Perfect. So you'll wear it. Rebecca looked at James with an expression that held everything: hope and fear and love and the terrifying vulnerability of wanting something this much. James nodded, his own eyes wet. Yeah, she'll wear it. Emily squealed and ran to her room to get ready for school, leaving James and Rebecca staring at each other on the couch while the morning sun painted everything gold. Did we just get engaged by an 8-year-old? Rebecca's voice was somewhere between laughing and crying. I think we did. James pulled her closer. Is that okay? It's perfect. Rebecca kissed him like sealing a promise. Terrifying and fast and completely perfect. The next 6 months passed in a blur of construction permits and FBI depositions, and nights spent planning a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. Donald Harris was arrested on 17 counts of bribery and fraud, his empire crumbling as witnesses came forward, emboldened by James's testimony. The trial was set for fall, but Harris's assets were frozen, his properties seized, his power dismantled piece by piece. The mixed-use development broke ground in May with a ceremony that drew local news coverage and curious neighbors who'd watched the Market Street strip mall transform from condemned to celebrated. James stood next to Rebecca while the mayor gave a speech about community partnership and ethical development. Emily between them in a dress she'd designed herself. Gary Young brought his whole family. Mrs. Clark wielded a ceremonial shovel like a weapon she knew how to use. The Martinez family stood in the front row, Mrs. Martinez crying as she thanked James for giving them the courage to rebuild. Kenneth Sterling actually smiled, genuine and warm, as he shook James's hand. You were right, Kenneth admitted quietly. About all of it. This is better than any deal I would have made. By the time fall arrived, the building was taking shape. Steel beams rising like a promise toward the sky. Robinson Auto's expanded garage visible on the ground floor. James worked alongside the construction crew when he could, his hands remembering the familiar weight of tools, the satisfaction of building something that would outlast him. The trial happened in October, a media circus that turned James into a reluctant public figure. He testified for 3 days, laying out the evidence of Harris's corruption with the same careful precision he used to diagnose engine problems. Harris's lawyers tried to paint him as a jealous competitor, a man bitter about losing a business opportunity. But the paper trail was too solid, the witness testimony too consistent. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Rebecca was in the courtroom gallery when the verdict came down, Emily sitting next to her, holding the wedding dress sketch like a talisman. James caught their eyes across the room and saw his whole future reflected back, messy and complicated and absolutely worth fighting for. The sentencing hearing happened 2 weeks later. Harris got 12 years federal prison, his properties liquidated to pay restitution to the businesses he'd destroyed. The Martinez family used their settlement to open a bakery in the mixed-use development right next to Robinson Auto. The community that Harris had tried to dismantle rebuilt itself stronger, bound together by the shared experience of surviving him. On a Friday evening in early December, exactly 1 year after the night James's hands had been shaking from alternator grease, he stood in Evergreen Cafe wearing a suit that fit properly for the first time in his life. The cafe was decorated for Christmas with lights and garland, the same tree in the corner that leaned slightly to the left. Emily walked down the makeshift aisle in the dress she'd designed, scattering flower petals with the seriousness of someone performing surgery. Mrs. Clark dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Gary and his family filled the front row. Kenneth sat next to the Martinez family, all of them witnesses to the impossible thing that was about to happen. Rebecca walked in wearing Emily's dress design rendered in silk and lace by the Morgan fashion design team. It was simple and elegant and exactly right, fitting her, like it had been waiting for this moment to exist. Harper officiated because she'd been there from the beginning, had served them coffee during their first date, had watched them fall in love over blueprints and partnership agreements. She smiled at them both with the satisfaction of someone who'd predicted this ending from the start. We gather here today to celebrate something rare, two people who chose each other not despite the complications, but because of them. James and Rebecca didn't meet cute. They met broken down, and they built something beautiful out of the wreckage. James's vows were simple. I promise to keep building with you, to stay soft in a hard world, to love you and Emily with everything I have, to honor the woman who taught me how to love in the first place by loving you with the same courage she showed me. Rebecca's vows made her voice shake. I promise to build up instead of tear down, to value character over credentials, to be the partner you deserve and the mother Emily needs, to prove every day that the best investments aren't measured in dollars but in lives changed for the better. They exchanged rings. James's a simple band, Rebecca's with a small diamond that had belonged to Sarah, offered by Mrs. Clark with trembling hands and a whispered blessing. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Sarah's love making room for Rebecca's, the past and present, woven together instead of competing. By the power vested in me by the state, and by about 1,000 cups of coffee I've served you both, I now pronounce you husband and wife. James, kiss your bride before I cry and ruin my mascara. James kissed Rebecca while Emily cheered, and the whole cafe erupted in applause. When they broke apart, Emily threw her arms around both of them, her voice muffled but clear. Now we're really a family, forever and ever. The reception was potluck, everyone bringing dishes that represented the community they'd all fought to preserve. Mrs. Clark's casserole, naturally. Gary's wife's enchiladas. The Martinez family's tres leches cake. Food and laughter and the kind of joy that came from surviving something hard together. As the evening wound down and the snow started falling outside the cafe windows, James pulled Rebecca onto the makeshift dance floor for their first dance. Emily pressed her face against the glass, watching the snowflakes fall with the same wonder she'd had a year ago. "You know what's crazy?" James whispered against Rebecca's hair. "What?" "If your car hadn't broken down, if I hadn't stopped, if we'd both just bailed on that blind date like we wanted to, none of this happens. The garage gets demolished. Harris wins. Emily keeps drawing pictures of families that don't exist." Rebecca looked up at him with eyes that held everything they'd built. "Guess we should send a thank you card to that alternator." They laughed and kept dancing while Emily watched the snow fall and Mrs. Clark took pictures on a disposable camera, and the future they'd fought for unfolded around them like a promise being kept. 6 years later, James stood in the same spot where the old garage used to be, now the ground floor of Robinson Morgan Commons. The mixed-use building rose 5 stories above him, every floor humming with life. Robinson Auto Repair occupied twice the space it used to with modern equipment, and a waiting area where customers could get coffee from the Martinez family bakery next door. Emily was 14 now, already taller than Rebecca, her talent earning her a spot in a prestigious art school scholarship program. She spent her afternoons sketching in the community space on the 5th floor surrounded by other kids, learning that creativity wasn't a luxury, but a birthright. Rebecca's flagship store occupied floors 2 and 3, a showcase of ethical fashion that had become a model for the industry. She'd built an empire not by destroying what came before, but by making room for it, and the business magazines called it revolutionary. James wiped his hands on a rag and walked upstairs to find his wife in her office going over designs with her team. She looked up when he entered and smiled the same smile that had caught him a year ago in a snowstorm, and he knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. That evening they walked to Evergreen Cafe for their anniversary dinner, the same booth, the same cracked leather, the same Harper who'd pronounced them husband and wife. Emily was with friends, giving them a rare night alone. 6 years. Rebecca shook her head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like forever. Both. James reached across the table for her hand. I've been thinking about what Harper said at our wedding, about meeting broken down. I used to think that was a bad thing, that we should have met perfect and whole. And now I think broken down was the only way we could have met. You needed to see me stop for a stranger when it cost me everything. I needed to see you fight for something that mattered more than profit. James's thumb traced circles on her palm. We didn't fall in love despite being broken. We fell in love because breaking showed us what we were made of. Rebecca's eyes were wet, but she was smiling. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. And you once compared my eyes to engine oil in the best possible way. I stand by that comparison. Engine oil keeps everything running smooth. And they laughed and ordered coffee and talked about Emily's college plans and the expansion Rebecca was planning and the community center James wanted to build with the profits from the garage. Outside, snow started falling, covering the city in white, just like it had that first night. Harper brought their check with a wink. On the house, anniversary special for the couple who proved that sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. Walking back to their apartment above the garage, the same space where Emily had mentioned Market Street all those years ago, James thought about Sarah, about the 3 promises she'd made him swear to keep. He'd kept them all. Emily was thriving, loved by 2 mothers in different ways. He hadn't let the world make him hard, even when it would have been easier. And he'd found love again, messy and complicated and worth every terrifying moment. The oak tree in the small garden behind the building bore its carvings like battle scars and love letters. JR plus SR equals forever, carved deep into the trunk, weathered but permanent. Below it, added on their first anniversary, JR plus RM plus ER equals family. Sarah's forever hadn't ended when she died. It had expanded to make room for Rebecca, for the life they were building for the future Emily would inherit. Love didn't replace love. It compounded, multiplied, grew like rings in a tree trunk, marking time and survival and growth. James traced the carvings with fingers that still smelled like motor oil despite washing them 3 times. Rebecca leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, both of them quiet in the falling snow. Think she would have liked me? Rebecca's voice was small, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. Sarah, she would have loved you. Not just because you make me happy, but because you're exactly the kind of stubborn, brave, ridiculous person she was. You would have been friends first, probably. Ganged up on me together. James kissed the top of Rebecca's head. She made me promise to find love again because she knew staying alone would kill something essential in me. You brought it back to life. Emily appeared on the balcony above them, leaning over the railing. Are you 2 being sappy again because it's gross and also kind of sweet and I'm conflicted about my feelings? Rebecca laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet garden. Come down here and join us, you brat. Emily bounded down the stairs and wedged herself between them, her arms around both their waists. They stood there in the snow, father, daughter, wife, family, and James felt the weight of every choice that had led here. The decision to stop for a stranger, the courage to tell the truth, the willingness to build instead of destroy. Sometimes the world gave you impossible choices. Sometimes you made them anyway and hoped the pieces fell together. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, they did. Above them, the Robinson Morgan Commons sign glowed against the night sky, letters bright enough to be seen from blocks away. Below, the garage hummed with the promise of Monday morning, when customers would bring their broken things and trust James to make them whole again. Around them, the community they'd fought to preserve thrived and grew roots deep enough to weather any storm. This was what it meant to keep a promise, to stay soft in a hard world, to build something that lasted not in spite of being broken down but because of it.